Welcome to You Can't Say That in Court, a podcast by Rise Women's Legal Center. I'm Vicky Law.
And I'm Stephanie Melnick. We're your hosts in this conversation about survivors of violence navigating the BC family law system. We recognize that the system is colonial and it causes harm to families, which disproportionately affects Indigenous people.
By speaking more widely about these harms, we hope to raise awareness about the challenges survivors face as they navigate the colonial family law system. This podcast is our attempt to collectively identify the barriers and ask for positive changes to be made. Thank you for joining us. Our podcast series will discuss difficult topics such as gender-based violence and intimate partner violence, including physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, and financial abuse. Please be aware that this is a thread that is woven throughout all the episodes, and we hope that you will take care of yourselves however you need. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 16 of You Can't Say That in Court. Today, we're talking about various groups of support workers and how they can work with survivors of violence while they navigate the family law system. Often, support workers are working in nonprofit settings, and this can include victim service workers, outreach workers, social workers, counselors, family law advocates, transition house workers, housing workers, and Indigenous outreach workers, along various other types of workers who we may not have listed here. But maybe we can talk about why support workers are so important to help survivors navigating the things that they need.
Yeah, when you're listing all those different types of support workers, Vicky, it makes me realize that they're really jobs and roles that were created to fill a community need. Like they're responsive, right? That something has been identified as a gap, and as a result, then hopefully there is some kind of like funding or a government initiative or something that comes up, and then this role is created to fill a gap or create like a Band-Aid solution. So I think about my previous work in victim services. It was definitely created as a role out of recognition for the fact that when a crime takes place, then someone is harmed. And police and Crown and the whole kind of criminal justice system is focused on the offender, like the person who caused the harm. And yes, they do have a secondary mandate or a bit of training or a role to support the victim. But their primary job is to bring the accused to justice. And so victim services was created specifically to meet the gap of support for victims without being pulled in like a bunch of different directions or having competing responsibilities. Yeah, so it's definitely a reactive thing. Most, I think, support worker roles are created reactively like this.
Mhm.
And that makes it really hard because, first of all, they're trying to play catch up on whatever the problem has been, but then also the funding might not be over a long enough time horizon. Like I said, it's like a government initiative or something that's just identified as a gap, and then there's not this ongoing stable funding.
I think the problem also is that, as with a lot of things, the demand for support just exceeds what the community can provide to
Yeah, yeah,
survivors. Like there's also, in addition to the number of people who need the support, there's also the types of things that a support worker can do can be limited based on what their organization does or what the funding or, people's knowledge. Like me as a lawyer, I don't know how to support someone looking for housing. That's not my area
right,
of expertise. And
right.
so I need to reach out to a housing worker who, and housing is a huge problem. So
Yeah.
you've got the housing workers who are already overworked, also trying to support the number of people to the best of their ability.
Yeah, and I wonder if by the time a problem or a gap kind of reaches the public consciousness, if it's always, I wonder if this is true, if it's always shocking how big the need is. Like it has to kind of get to that tipping point, right? Where a government
Mhm.
initiative or program will be created. And so just speaking to your point about never being able to meet the need. I wonder if we're just always going to be surprised by the fact that there's such a big need or demand for help in particular areas. And so as a result, the funding is never really enough. Um,
Yeah. And I think it's a little bit difficult because when we're providing direct services, it's always one-on-one, right? The
right,
worker or the lawyer is providing direct services to one person. And sometimes it might be hard to zoom out and look at like the systemic cause or the systemic reasons
right.
or the systemic change that needs to happen. And when we realize that and are aware of that, it's too late again. So it's reactive to the
Yeah.
need of the community, the need of the group of people that we're trying to support. And this constant catch up is in play.
Yeah, and it almost sets up the roles for failure because, yeah, if the idea is that there's this big community need or there's a big gap in service or something, and then we're reacting to it, then we're just always trying to play catch up. And yeah, and I mean, we know that with, election cycles and just how government
Mhm.
works, and creating programs is a really great way to address a problem in the moment, but it's still a band-aid. It's not going back to the underlying systemic issues like you're talking about, where we
Yeah.
restructure something or we take out some implicit bias that's already in there, or yeah, really try to fix the underlying problem. It's definitely easier and cheaper to do band-aid solutions. It's just not as effective.
Yeah. And I think the band-aid solution um, sometimes is a short-term solution, which doesn't help because, as you and I know, creating a new support network takes time. It takes time
Yeah.
for the community and everyone involved to learn how to work with the new support, the new program. And it could take several months. But when the funding is limited to 2 or 3 years, that doesn't give
Hmm.
a lot of runway for the new program to be successful. And so what we're really are looking for is more longer term funding for the support to be there. Because after the 2 or 3 years, once it's removed and there's no longer continued funding, the community also experiences the detrimental effects of having that funding cut when they've
Yeah.
relied on this new program or service for a while.
Right. Yeah. And not just the funding timeline being longer, but also being flexible. Because once a program
Hmm.
is put in place, it's normally because there's a specific issue that's been identified, like let's say housing. But then there are going to be other pieces that come up. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're trying to sing the praises of support workers today, is because they might be hired or working in a specific role with really well-defined scope, but that scope shifts really quickly when they
Hmm.
start looking at all the intersecting issues that their clients are dealing with. And I think family law is one of those pieces that just gets pulled into, or is a struggle for many people who are accessing other services.
Hmm.
So it's a lot more complex than what the initial band-aid solution thinks. And so having some flexibility and saying, okay, well, yeah, if you're a housing outreach worker, you can also get or access some legal training just so that you have a preliminary understanding of what family law is about. That could be
Yeah.
really helpful.
Yeah, and I think we know so many workers who don't have the legal training, but they are
Yeah.
there to support the survivor navigating family law because there's no one else in their community doing that work. And
Yeah,
so
exactly.
they're not their response can't be, I'm not going to help you with that. That's not my job.
Right, right.
Because their job is to support the survivor.
Hmm.
So now they're, dipping their toes and trying to support this person as best as they can, but they don't have the knowledge or the training to navigate that arena.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have worked through our work at the virtual legal clinic through with so many different types of support workers, and it feels like there's just a personality out there that really is interested in family law, but it doesn't have anything to do necessarily with what folks do for their work. I remember
Hmm.
there was a brain injury clinic counselor who was super fired up about some family law issues, and she was extremely sharp in understanding what were the points of tension for her client, but her whole job was to support this acquired brain injury. It was not at all even related to family law, but because her client was struggling and she was actually interested in wading into the complexity of it. It's kind of interesting how many different people we work with who are really good at grasping what their clients are struggling with in family law.
Mhm. And so because of limited funding or the funding challenges and also the lack of training or the knowledge or people wanting to help but don't know how,
Hmm.
we see this kind of high turnover happening in a lot of the sector that we're in, because I think there's a real thing about burnout in the
Yep.
anti-violence sector. And there is a myriad of reasons why. But I think one of the things is there's too much demand for the
Right.
work,
Yeah.
and there isn't enough supports to go around.
Yeah. Well, like we said, I mean, kind of right at the start with if the role is created in a reactive way, then we're just always trying to play catch up. So it's almost universally, no matter what we're talking about,
Hmm.
whether it's housing or employment or food security or family law, it's not properly funded. So then um, that creates uncertainty for the worker because they don't know how long they're going to have their job for. That also means that they're underpaid because if there's not enough money to go around, either their wage is lower than it probably should be given the value of the work, but also they're not necessarily being paid for overtime or for being on call. And so there's some underpayment in some way. And yeah, that creates turnover. That it's very hard to stay in a role under those conditions for a long, long
Hmm.
time. I mean, there are some people that do it, but it's really difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. And what we see is, especially for communities in rural and remote areas, that when a worker leaves, it takes a very long time to have that position filled.
Right.
At sometimes it's like several months for that position to be filled. And so now you've got the community who are used to having a support, needing to learn how to work without that support for several months until a new person is hired. And then when that new person is hired, they then have to relearn how to collaborate and work with the new person. And so it's not very effective because the community is always adapting and learning how to work with a position that should be there on an ongoing, continuous, long-term basis.
Yeah. Well, when someone leaves their job, then that leaves a huge hole and it puts a burden on either the other workers in that organization to pick up the slack or other
Hmm.
workers within the community to fill that gap then. So then they're extending outside the scope of what they're supposed to be slash used to doing. And yeah, I remember there was someone who told us that if a position is vacant for too long, then the community forgets that it's even a resource.
Hmm.
And so, like you were starting to touch on, like reestablishing the connection points and the relationships, it's really all very, it's always fluctuating at all times. And someone new comes into the
Hmm.
role, they have to reestablish the relationships, they have to, yeah, kind of set out the scope of their work again. It's really, really hard work. Uh, yeah,
Yeah, and I guess one thing like we forgot to touch on is like why are people reaching out to support workers for family
right.
law help? I think we probably should have addressed that first. But
Right.
I mean, it's not a surprise. Lawyers are expensive, and in the last episode, we also talked about not there not having being a lot of lawyers in rural and remote communities,
Hmm.
and so those two compounded leaves a lot of survivors reaching out to support workers for help to navigate the family law system, and so that's why we are here talking about
Yes.
why support workers need to be in the family law sphere.
Right. And I think they kind of get pulled into that work accidentally most of the time because as we were already saying, if you're sitting with a client and your job is to help the client and they bring up a family law issue that they're struggling with, it's quite natural that a support worker is going to go and do some research or try and find a program that can help or whatever it is. And so then they get pulled into that sphere. And I think most support workers very quickly realize just how complicated it can get, and also how big the consequences are. You know, if we're talking about time with children and safety from violence, these are big pieces of someone's life, and all the other pieces depend on safety and security and, keeping connected with the family. Um, yeah, it's understandable why support workers get pulled in. And often because they work for nonprofits, they are a free resource to someone. So, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that financial barrier is real. And if someone can't afford a lawyer, but they're sitting in front of a professional who is there to help them, then they're going to rely on them for some family law work as well, if they can. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's why the virtual legal clinic at Rise was created, to collaborate
Hmm.
with a number of support workers across the province. And I know various other legal organizations in BC are trying to fill that gap as well. But as mentioned earlier, the demand is just way too big for any of the one organization or even collectively to support the clients who are needing the help. And so we rely on support workers a lot at Rise,
Mhm.
to work with our legal services to make sure that clients don't fall through the cracks.
Yeah, and I like that you brought it back to the whole point of the episode being the lack of access to family lawyers, because even if support workers are given a whole bunch of family law training, and even if they have an interest in this area and they're really good at it, they still can't replace the job of lawyers being able to go
Mhm.
into a court and represent a client. And we know that that's a really stressful part of navigating family law, is having to represent yourself in court and try to figure out how to do all the things that a lawyer actually knows how to do, but doing it without a lawyer. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, it kind of goes, it's a bit ironic because with the system that we have right now, there's a lot of unrepresented litigants in court. We
Hmm.
know that, especially
Hmm.
for family law. And the expectation is for them to navigate this huge system, this huge and complex system, without any legal training, whether they are the litigant or the support worker supporting the survivor and other
Right.
litigants. And when we look at the training that lawyers have and the expectation that is placed on them to navigate the legal system, there's no way an unrepresented litigant or even a support worker would know um, all the nooks and crannies of how to get through that system successfully.
Right.
But that burden is placed on them right now because of the inaccessibility of legal representation that we have currently.
Right. Yeah, there is a lot of recognition, especially from the provincial court in BC, that there's a high number of unrepresented litigants. And there are lots of tools and programs that are being offered. I mean, Legal Aid has programs like Duty Counsel, for example, so someone can consult with them on a list day and just get some really quick summary advice. The provincial court has a bunch of resources on their website. And so there is that recognition that people are out there navigating this on their own without a lawyer. But yeah, it's kind of it's unfair to expect someone to be able to navigate the system as if they are a lawyer, placing all of the requirements of how to file documents, when to file documents, which documents to file, what to say at which hearing, what's admissible, what's not, following rules of evidence. All these things are just, it's too much for someone to do themselves. We have had clients tell us that after they're finished with their family law matter, they feel like they've already been to law school. You know, they've learned so much from doing it the first time. They wish they could go back and do it better. You know, and not
Yeah.
make the mistakes that they made. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
And we've also heard clients and support workers are like, you know what, I've supported someone going through this, or I've gone through this, and so now they want to help others go through it. So they go to law
right.
school to become a lawyer
Yeah,
to
yeah,
support folks navigating this system. So that's a great way, I think, also to have more people have the knowledge and skills to know how to navigate the system, especially for survivors of violence.
hmm,
And a lot of our research at Rise reports, um, a lot of participants who join our research say, a lot of clients say, they wouldn't have gotten through this without this amazing support worker or advocate who was by their side and supporting them, cheering them on, making sure that they don't give up. And so we really want to acknowledge and give a huge shout out to everyone who is doing this work, supporting clients, navigating the family law system.
absolutely. We know how hard it is. We've seen how much struggle there is, not just for your clients, but also for, yeah, the workers that are walking alongside them, right?
Mhm.
Um, yeah, there was a bit about I know collaboration is a theme that we have kind of all through a lot of our episodes, but I think it's especially important in this context because the scopes on support workers are so well defined. And one of the things that I was thinking about in preparation for today's episode was just how hard it is to work outside the scope of the work that you're doing, and the kind of the flexibility that support workers have to have and the creativity they have in order to help their clients in family law in particular. Like a sexual assault worker, for example, will be funded primarily for clients who've experienced sexual assault. And so if they're particularly good as a support worker in the family law space, they can't just help anyone with family law stuff. They actually have to meet the mandate or the requirements of that specific, very narrow program. So I think collaboration is particularly important to help support workers who are bound by the boundaries of their program, but also can reach across the divide and work with others who are maybe better trained, or lawyers in the space or whatever it might be. So yeah, collaboration, big
Yeah.
keyword.
Yeah, and I think in addition to the limited funding or the limited parameters of everyone's roles, is it's impossible to know everything, right, in
Oh,
this
yes.
huge and
Yeah,
complex system. It's
right.
impossible and unrealistic to expect one person to know everything that is going on for a survivor. And so we do need to rely on each other's expertise, and go to the people who have that knowledge and work collaboratively so that we can support mutual clients and the survivors that are navigating the housing, the separation, the family law, the childcare, and
Yeah,
and.
right.
So I really, really love working with all the advocates and support workers through Rise, and that is what the virtual legal clinic is built on, is the idea of
Hmm.
collaboration. And I know that we wouldn't be able to support the number of clients who go through our program without the external support workers that we have. So huge shout out to them.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a lovely place to end.
Yes.
A
And
natural, upbeat conclusion. Yeah.
which was rare,
It's
rare
rare,
in our
exactly. We're
sector.
looking we're
Yes.
looking for them.
But it's good to count and acknowledge the good things. And so thank you everyone for joining with us today on the issues of family violence and how support workers can help survivors. And join us next time for more about safety, and perhaps we'll talk about text facilitated violence in future episodes. So thanks again. Bye for now.
Great. Thanks for listening. Everything that we have said today is not legal advice. If you or someone you know needs legal advice, please consult with a lawyer. We want to acknowledge that this podcast would not be possible without the generous contribution by Women and Gender Equality Canada, Femmes et Égalité des Genres Canada.